Hey guys, it's Miss Wallace. We're going to start with our first topic of the last unit of the new material that we still have to learn. Alright, the title for this page is going to be Solve Quadratic Equations with Factoring. And so remember, this is the last unit. We're going to be working with quadratic equations. And so if you'll remember that quadratic just means that something is in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. And equation just means that this is going to be set equal to something. And so that's what we're going to learn. We're going to learn how to solve this. So if you don't have to write this down, but if you'll just think about what it means to solve something, you all know how to solve regular equations. Like if I have 2x plus 3 is equal to, let's say, 9. You all know if I ask you to solve this, I still can't spell. If I ask you to solve this equation, you all know that that means, draw your line, take away 3 from each side, you get 2x is equal to 6, divide by 2 on each side, and you get x is equal to 3. That's what it means to solve, is we are finding out what x equals. That's what it means to solve an equation. And so that's what we're going to be doing for these types of problems, is we're going to be finding out what is x. What is x going to be equal to? So let's start out with an example. So we're going to call this example number 1. And the problem is going to look something like this. So we've got x squared minus 10x plus 16 is equal to 0. Now this is what we call standard form. And so your step 1 is always going to be to make sure, I'm going to write this off to the side, step 1 is to write equation in standard form. And so standard form always looks like what we talked about up here. Standard form is always some coefficient x squared, and that's good. We have that right here, the coefficient here being 1. And then plus or minus. We tend to write it as a plus if we're just writing it in general, but it's okay that there's a minus here. So plus bx, well that's good because we have this negative 10 or minus 10x second. And then it's always going to be plus some constant c, which is plus 16 here. When we're writing things in standard form, we're always going to want to make sure that it's equal to 0. Now that's going to make a little more sense when we get to our next example, and I'll show you. But these equations, we want them to be equal to 0. That's going to be super important. So when a problem is in standard form, it is some number x squared plus or minus some number x plus or minus some constant number equal to 0. We call that standard form. Standard form. All right. And so here's what we're going to do. Step 2, I'll write that down here. Step 2 next is going to be to factor the problem. Now we reviewed, if you did the review assignments, we reviewed what it means to factor. And so we're just going to review that real quick here. To factor this means we want to know what are the two things that will multiply together to get this equation. Now we learned a couple of different, actually we learned 4 different ways of factoring. One of them being the add and multiply method. One of them being that we would take, if there's a coefficient out here, we would multiply a times c and then use the box method. And so in this case, the way that we're going to factor is nice. We can just use add and multiply because we have a 1 out here. There's nothing that we would need to multiply. So we're going to factor this part of the equation. We're actually going to ignore this equal to 0 for just a second. You can even put your finger over it, and we're just going to think about this part right here. So I'm going to put my finger over it. We need to find something that's going to add together to get negative 10 and multiply together to get 16. And so if we think about that, maybe we come off to the side here in a little bit of extra workspace. I want to find something that'll add together to get negative 10, multiply together to get 16. I'm going to start thinking about 16. Think about a couple, think about all the factors of 16. You might try 4 and 4, that doesn't work. 16 and 1, that doesn't work. Oh, wait, 8 and 2 will multiply together to get 16, and I know that that will also, 8 and 2 will add together to get 10, but because this 10's negative, that's actually going to make both of these negative. So negative 2 times negative 8 gives me positive 16, and that's good because negative 2 plus negative 8 also gives me negative 10. And so those are going to be my factors when I'm factoring down here. Now, because we don't have to use the box method in this case, because we do not have a coefficient here, once I know these two factors, and I know some of you like to use the box method anyway, I'm looking at you, Alyssa, if you're listening to this, but if we don't have to use the box method here, right? We can just go, again, I'm not thinking about this equal to 0 yet, but we can just go down here and put our sets of parentheses there and there, and I'm just going to use these factors. And so I'm going to put x minus 2 is one factor, and then x minus 8 is going to be my other factor. Now, that equals this, right? So if I were to double distribute this back out, I could check myself, make sure that x times x is x squared, x times, let's just actually go ahead and check that over here. X minus 2, x minus 8. We're just checking it to make sure it's actually equal to what we had up here. So if we double distribute, x times x is x squared, x times minus 8 is minus 8x. We're finished with that. Now we've got to double distribute the negative 2. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x, and minus 2 times negative 8 is plus 16. Add those in the middle, and that does come out to be negative 10. So it works. We've factored this quadratic correctly. And so the next thing, or this was just the check over here, so we really don't need that anymore. That this part is equal to this part, but it's still equal to 0. So we're still going to bring down that equal to 0 part in the next step once we factored it. Now, here's where it is really important that this be equal to 0 over here or not something else. Because think about what we know. If two things are being multiplied, that equals 0. Like, let's just think about if I'm going to multiply any two things in the whole wide world and it's going to equal 0. Let's say I multiply 2 times x and it's going to be equal to 0. What do you know that x has to be? Well, it has to be 0, right? 2 times 0 is the only way of getting, it's the only thing you can multiply 2 by to get 0. What if I said it this way? What if I said y times 4 is equal to 0? Some number times 4 is equal to 0. What does y have to be? Y has to be 0, right? It has to be 0 times 4. That's the only way we get 4. So what if I just tell you two arbitrary things? What if I say a times b it's equal to 0? Well, here's what we know. We either know that A has to be 0 or B has to be 0. A could be 20, but if A is 20, B would have to be 0. One of these numbers has to be 0 in order to make it equal 0. What if B were 50? Well, that would mean A has to be 0 in order to make this product equal to 0. So if we have two things that are they're being multiplied and they're equal to 0, here's what we know to be true. Either A has to be equal to 0 or B has to be equal to 0. One of those two things has to be true if this product is equal to 0. Okay, so we're going to use that thought to go back to here. If I have x minus 2 in parentheses times x minus 8 in parentheses, and it's equal to 0, well, what has to be true? We're multiplying two things here, and the answer is going to be 0. We're going to break this apart, and we're going to say one of two things. We know from this statement that either x minus 2 has to be equal to 0, or we know that x minus 8 has to be equal to 0. The only way to make this product true is this may be 0 Is that 0? If so, 0 times something is equal to 0. Or it might be true that this is equal to 0. We don't know. Don't make fun of my little squirrely brackets. They look, swirly brackets, they look kind of funny. And yes, I think I also just said squirrely brackets. I don't know, y'all. I still can't talk, even though you're not here in this room with me. All right, so again, hopefully that makes sense. We're going to either the first factor has to be equal to 0 or the second factor has to be equal to 0. And guess what we're going to do from here? We're just going to solve these equations separately. So if x minus 2 has to be equal to 0, then what's going to be true about x? Well, we're just going to solve it. We're going to add 2 to each side. That cancels. X is equal to 2. Or we're going to solve this one. We're going to add 8 on each side. That cancels. X is equal to 8. So when you solve these questions, you're actually going to end up with a possibility of 2 answers. Either x is equal to 2, that's coming from this equation, or x is equal to 8. Because watch what will happen, and this is just going to be a check. So we think about our original equation. This is just, we're checking our answers. If we have the problem, let me go back to the original. I forgot my whiteout at school, y'all. I don't even have it here with me. All right, so the original problem was x squared minus 10x plus 16 is equal to 0. We're just going to check it. We're going to plug in our numbers. So what if x is 2? Well, that would be 2 squared minus 10 times 2 plus 16. Does that equal 0? Well, 2 squared is 4 minus, that's 4. 10 times 2 is 20. Plus 16 is equal to 0. 4 minus 20 is negative 16 plus 16. Guess what that's equal to? 0. So yes, that works. If x is equal to 2, it does make this equation equal to 0. And then we'll check the other one as well. So the original problem, again, was x squared minus 10x plus 16 is equal to 0. If I plug in an 8, so we're saying that the answer is either 2 or 8. If I plug in an 8, that's 8 squared minus 10 times 8 plus 16 is equal to 0. 8 squared is 64 minus 10 times 8 is 80 plus 16 is equal to 0. 64 minus 80 is, guess what? You can type it in a calculator if you don't believe me, but it's negative 16 plus 16 is equal to 0. Negative 16 plus 16 is 0. So that also works. So either x is 2 or x is 8. There are 2 answers to quadratic equations. All right, so that's example 1. We're going to do another example in just a second. I'll give you a second to take that in if you need to finish writing that down. I miss you guys. It's weird giving notes to myself. All right, let's do example number 2. You can also pause the video. You can't pause me in real life, but you could pause the video if you need to. All right, example number 2. So let's do one. Let's say that we have x squared minus 5x plus 6 is equal to 0. And so we have another quadratic. It's equal to 0. So remember, step 1 from the top was to make sure it's in standard form. So we just want to make sure that it's something x squared plus or minus something x plus some constant number, and we want to make sure that's equal to 0. And so right now everything's in standard form. That looks good. That's our first step. Second step is we want to factor. So we're going to factor this. We do not have to use the box method because we do not have a number out in front here, so we don't have to do any a times c. So we can just use the regular add and multiply method. We'll go off here to the side. What are 2 things that will add together to get negative 5, but multiply together to get positive 6? And so we think about the factors of positive 6. We think about maybe 6 and 1. But 6 times 1, we cannot add 6 plus 1 to give me negative 5. Even if we made one of those negative, that wouldn't, or even if we made both of them negative, if we added that together, it would be -7, so that won't work. So we try two more things that will multiply together to get 6, and actually it ends up being -3 times -2. Those two things will multiply together to get +6. They also add together to get -2. And so those are going to be our factors. Because we didn't have that number out here, we don't have to use the box method. You can if you want to, but because I've got my factors and it's just a simple add and multiply factoring, then we write down our factors. So we're going to use x minus 3 and x minus 2. All right, so we factored, and now we're ready to use step 3, which is knowing that either this has to be 0 or this has to be 0 in order for this product to equal 0. So once we get to this step, we're going to split it into 2. So we know we're just going to take the first factor here and we're going to say, okay, either x minus 3 has to be equal to 0, or we take the second one, x minus 2 has to be equal to 0. Either this is 0 or this is 0 in order for the product to be 0. Split it up, write the word or between them, draw your line, and we're going to solve each of these equations. So we add 3 to each side, x is equal to 3, or add 2 to each side, and we get x is equal to 2. So either x is equal to 3 or x is equal to 2. Now you could plug those in and you could test them out into this. If we plug in a 3, 3 squared is 9, minus 3 times 5 is 15. So 9 minus 15 gives me -6, plus 6 is 0, so that works. Or if we plug in a 2, 2 squared is 4, minus 5 times 2 gives me 10. 4 minus 10 is -6, plus 6 gives me 0. Now I didn't write that out, but if you want to plug those numbers back in up here, you could even type this into your calculator, and you can check it. Actually, let me grab a calculator and we'll practice that. So I know some of you have your calculators at home. I'm just going to use Desmos. You can type this into your black calculator as well if you've got it, but we'll type this in Desmos. So in order to just to check our work, we could plug in, if you type in 3, we're plugging in 3 here, so 3 squared minus 5 times 3 plus 6. Notice it comes out to be 0, and you can also check the 2, the answer 2, so 2 squared minus 5 times 2 plus 6 also gives me the answer 0, and so I know both of my answers are correct. And that's it. That's your final answers. Those two, remember, you're always going to get 2 answers. All right, we're going to do 2 more examples because both of these were in standard form. What happens if it's not in standard form? So I'm going to get a new sheet of paper. Maybe you have to flip your page as well. This is going to be like the second page of notes. All right, and so what if we have a problem? This is going to be example number 3. What if we have a problem that looks like this? 6x squared minus x is equal to 2. All right, so remember, our step 1 is always put it in standard form and make sure it's equal to 0. We'll notice that this is not equal to 0 right now. But it's a very simple thing to get it equal to 0. All we need to do is take 2 away from this side. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to subtract 2 from this side. You can almost think of it as almost like solving. Draw your line. If I subtract 2 from 2, then that's going to give me 0 on this side of the equation, and that's good. But what I do to one side of the equation, I must do to the other. So I'm also going to take 2 away from this side. Now, this is 6x squared, and this is minus x. And that has an x squared, and that is an x, and this is just a 2, so we actually can't subtract. We don't want to do 6 minus 2 because this has got the x squared, this is an x. So we're just going to rewrite this whole side. There are no like terms we can combine here. So 6x squared minus x minus 2 is what we're going to end up with on this side of the equation. And now it's in standard form. Now we're ready to solve it. It's got some number x squared minus some number, there's really a 1 there, x minus a constant number 2. It's equal to 0. We're ready to solve. Now, second step after you get it in standard form is to make sure that this is factored. Now, this has a number in front of it, and so we're not going to be able to use just the old add and multiply because we've got an a value here. So we're going to have to use the box method, and we're going to multiply the a value times the c value. So let's do a little bit of review for the box method. So we've got 6 times -2. That's going to give me -12. And remember, there is really a -1 here. And so now I'm going to think of my factors. I'm trying to find something now that will add together to get -1, but will multiply together to get -12. So I'm going to go over here and think about my factors. So I think about the things that are going to multiply to get -12. Well, it might be -12 and 1. That's not going to add to get -1. It might be 6 and 2, but that's also not going to be add together to get -1. 3 and 4 are probably going to be our best bet. We need a -1. We need them to add together to get -1. So we need a negative and a positive. I'm going to try -4 times 3. And that does add together to get -1. So -4 plus 3 gives me -1. -4 times 3 gives me -12. And remember, because we've got this 6 here, we're going to have to use the box. So I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to draw my box. We cannot just put them in parentheses yet. Remember, this box needs to be equal to this original equation. So remember, I put the first factor in the first upper box. So that's going to be my 6x squared. I put that last number, not the -12, but remember the last number, in the bottom box, bottom part of the window. We used to say it looked like a window. And then I'm going to put these factors in the diagonals. So this is going to be -4. Remember what we have to add here? It has to be an x because it has to equal this middle term here. And then 3x. So remember to check yourself, just look at your box and ask yourself, does this box actually equal my original equation? It's 6x squared, yes. These two things, we can add -4x and 3 to get -1x, yes. That gives us the middle term, and then we've got the -2, so this box is equal to this equation. So we're ready to push out our greatest common factors. It feels like it's been a long while since we've done this, doesn't it? All right, 6 and -4. Both of them have 2 in common, and both of them have x in common. So that's the greatest common factor along the top row. 3 and 2 only have 1 in common, and they don't have an x in common. So 1. And remember, the last sign that you touch is the sign that you're going to go with. So positive, positive. All right, now we're going to push up. So 6 and 3 have 3 in common, and they also have an x in common. And -4x and -2 have a -2 in common. And remember, it's negative because the last thing it touches when you push that greatest common factor out is a negative. So just -2 in common. So here are my factors. And so we are going to, remember, everything's equal to 0. So now that I have my factor here and I have my factor here, I'm going to make sure that those are set equal to 0. So it's going to be 2x plus 1. It doesn't matter which one you write first. You could have written 3x minus 2 first. 3x minus 2. And then remember, we're solving this. We know it's equal to something. It's not just this answer anymore, but it's equal to 0. And so we're not finished because remember, our whole goal is to solve for what is x going to be. So I've got a factor equal to 0. 2 factors being multiplied together equal to 0. And so my last step, once I have my factors, just like we did a minute ago, is to set each of those equal to 0. So I'm going to copy them down. So it's either the first one, 2x plus 1 is equal to 0, or the second one's equal to 0 in order to make my product equal to 0. So first one equal to 0, second one equal to 0, draw your lines down the middle, we're going to solve each one. Now this one's going to take 2 steps to solve, but that's okay. -1, that's gone. We've got 2x is equal to -1, and we have to divide by 2. You could write that as a decimal, but I'm going to keep it as a fraction. So x is equal to -1/2, or add 2, we get 3x is equal to 2. Divide by 3. We could also write this as a decimal, but I'm going to keep it as a fraction. 2/3. So we get fraction answers here, but that's okay. And we can type this back into Desmos if we want to check ourselves. So remember our original equation up here at the very, very beginning, we want to go back to the beginning, is 6x squared minus x should be equal to 2. And so I want to check my answers in Desmos. So I'm going to type in 6 parenthesis my x, my first x, I'm saying that x is equal to -1/2. Remember, this is just a way to check your answers. This is not a necessary step, but it's just typing it in to check it. That's squared minus, and then x is -1/2, and that should be equal to 2. And so that works. And then I'm going to type it in one more time with my second answer, which was 2/3. And so my original equation is 6 from up here. 6 times, second answer I said was 2/3. So x is being squared minus another x, and I said x was 2/3, and that should also be equal to 2. And so both of my answers check out, and we're good to go. All right, we're going to do one more example together. And actually for this one, if you want to pause the video, I'm going to write the problem down. If you want to pause the video and try it on your own, then that might be a good idea. So copy down the equation. This is example 4. Copy the equation down, press pause on the video, and then I'll work it out and you can check yourself and see if you were right. All right, so example number 4, last example, we're going to do x squared minus 2x equals 15. Go ahead and copy that down, press pause on the video, and then you can unpause it to see the solution. All right, I hope you took the time to pause it and work it out yourself. So let's go through the steps here. All right, first of all, is this in standard form? No, it is not. We want it equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 15 from each side. Make sure that that's equal to 0. 15 minus 15 is 0. And over here, we can't take 15 away from either one of these, so it's going to be x squared minus 2x minus 15. We're ready now to factor because it is in standard form. Something x squared minus something x minus a constant. And so because this, we do not have to use box method here. There is no number here. So we're just going to use the regular add and multiply. We want two things that'll add together to get -2, multiply together to get -15. I'm going to come off here to the side, see if I can come up with those two things. Think about the things that'll multiply together to get -15. -15 and 1 doesn't work. 3 and 5. So we know it needs to be negative, so -5 times 3 and -5 plus 3 are the ways that I can get -2. And so because again it's just add and multiply, we do not have to use the box. We can just write our factors down, and it's going to be x minus 5, x plus 3, and it's going to be equal to 0. Those are my factors that come from what I found over here. Last step is to just set these equal to 0. So x minus 5 is equal to 0. Remember to write the word or between them because there could be two answers. So x minus 5 is equal to 0, or x plus 3 is equal to 0. Those two things, remember, come from here, and then we solve it. Plus 5, and minus 3, minus 3. This one is going to be x is equal to 5, and this one is going to be x is equal to -3. When you're solving from here, I hope you notice that basically your answers you get are the opposite of the factors. Here the factor was -5, you get an answer of +5. Here that factor was +3, and you get an answer of -3. And so those are your two answers. And so when you, as you're practicing on the quizzes, as you kind of work through these problems on your own, you'll notice that every answer is going to have two different answers. And so when we solve a quadratic, we are finding the solutions that are possible for x. The other thing you can make sure that you're doing is checking yourself in your calculator, checking yourself in Desmos. Remember, and we'll do that real quickly, remember you want to go back to the original problem, the problem that you were first given, and plug in your x value. So you're telling me that x is equal to 5. I should be able to plug in 5 and then squared minus 2 times 5, and that should give me, in this case, answer 15. First answer works. I'm going to also type in the -3 solution. I have to cover up my problem here a second. Alright, so you're also telling me that x could be -3. I plug in -3 squared minus 2 times -3 times -3, and the answer is also 15. So both of my answers work. Alright guys, those are our notes for today. I hope that that makes sense. If not, shoot me an email and ask me some questions. I can do some more examples if we need to. Just let me know, and good luck on the quizzes. Bye!